Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
And welcome once again to Faith on Trial. I'm Deacon Mike Mano. I'm here in the studio with Gina Noe. And I guess a happy leap day to everybody because, as you know, we tape on Thursday, and this is the 29th of February, which comes once every 4 years. So anybody who's having a birthday today who hasn't had one in 4 years, happy birthday.
Right. Big celebration after 4 years of nothing but waiting for that next 29th of February. I noticed there's lots of sales and bargains and freebies today. That's kind of fun.
That's neat. That's neat. And there's a lot going on out there these days, and hopefully we'll cover some of it here today. We've got a couple of good guests, I think. We have Arielle Del Turco, who is the director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. And they have a new report out on the worldwide hostility toward Christianity. And we'll talk to Arielle about that. And then we're going to talk to Jeremy Dies from First Liberty, who's dealing with a church in Texas that tried to put an advertisement on Hulu and was told that it was religious indoctrination and they couldn't do that. And so they sent him a nice long letter. You know, we talked about this the other day about the letters that are sent out ahead of time. And Hulu,
sure, to try to resolve it without the cost or time.
And it was resolved. Hulu backed down and I guess saw the light. So we'll talk to Jeremy about that. When we booked the guest, it was already a controversy, and now it's kind of gone away.
It's resolved itself?
But I'm not sure that it doesn't represent other controversies out there, and who better than First Liberty to tell us whether that's true or not.
That sounds like a great story to hear, all the back story to it.
Right, very good.
The fun. So I don't know what state that happened in, or if it was just a national thing.
Well, it was a Texas church.
Okay, so I was going to say that Texas and Florida right now are in the courts, I think, because they have laws that require companies to not censor speech.
Right, and I think that was pointed out to Hulu. Now, Hulu is part of Disney.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, it's part of Disney. So we maybe kind of know where some of that came from.
Well, Disney has been in the forefront of promoting, anyway, certain speech.
It has been. All right, do you have a prayer to open us up with?
I do. I have a prayer for peace today. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God of peace, bring your peace into our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred, and strengthen us all in hope. Give us the wisdom and the courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Gina. We will be right back after these messages with Arielle Del Turco from the Family Research Council. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, and we have with us right now Arielle Del Turco, who is the director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. And welcome again to our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are happy to have you. We're happy you could make time to be with us. You've put out an interesting report. It's called Free to Believe, and it's talk about the intensifying intolerance toward Christians in the West. So this is kind of a worldwide phenomenon, or at least a Western-wide phenomenon. And if you can, before we start with some of my observations of it, if you can kind of give us the genesis of this project and what are some of the kind of the things we want to take away from it.
Yeah, so I've been tracking religious freedom conditions around the world at FRC for several years now. And especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, we noticed more and more different religious freedom violations happening across the Western world, some that we hadn't really seen before, and they just seem to be growing in frequency. So we wanted to take a look at what was happening in Western countries, not just covering policy or legislation, but looking at specific incidents where Western governments, these governments that are supposed to be free, open, and democratic, were going after Christians for living out their faith in some way or violating their religious freedom. So we specifically looked at that, and so we looked at 34 countries across the West, and we identified incidents in 16 of those countries, and from 2020 to 2023, which was our reporting period, we found 168 incidents. And so really we think this is just scratching the surface, but it gives us a good picture of what's taking place across the Western world.
Well, what was one of the interesting things to me was that these were a collection of a lot of isolated instances that I think when you look at, you see a pretty clear picture of what the attitude of society is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you see these all together, it paints a different picture, because we can tend to think, well, one person somewhere in some, whether U.S. state or European country, might have some issue, but this isn't going to affect me. But when you see it all together, we're looking at more of a trend. And so I think this is something we should be taking seriously.
Okay. What are, from your viewpoint, what are the, I was going to say the highlights, but I guess it would be the lowlights of this report?
Yeah, so we saw a lot of incidents in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom especially, and especially coming out of the UK. There were several incidents, and your listeners might be familiar with this, where people were arrested for often praying completely silently in their own heads in the United Kingdom near an abortion clinic. So in various parts of the UK, they've set up these buffer zones where it's a pretty wide radius where people cannot protest or speak to people trying to enter an abortion facility or really make it known that you disapprove of abortion at all. But one of the things that are specifically prohibited in many of these buffer zones is prayer. And so we've seen people arrested for specifically praying, right, which is a serious violation of religious freedom. In one incident we saw where Isabel von Spruce, she's a pro-life Christian in the United Kingdom, she was just standing on a public sidewalk where she's perfectly allowed to stand somewhat near an abortion facility, and the police came up to her and questioned her, and they said, why are you here? Are you protesting? She said, no. Are you trying to talk to people entering the abortion facility? She said, no. And then they specifically asked, are you praying? And she said, well, maybe in my own head I am. And so based on that, because she was praying in her own head, she was arrested. So we're seeing, when we're seeing arrests for just simply prayer, and especially praying in your own head on a public sidewalk, I think this is a very dangerous development happening in the United Kingdom.
I remember one of the incidences, and I think it was in England, where a person posted something on Facebook about, I guess it was gender transition or whatever it was, and the police came to his place of business, and I don't know if they arrested him, but they were at least harassing him a little bit, and they told him that he had to start thinking right or thinking correctly, something like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And really, we see a lot of the religious freedom violations. The sticking point is this issue of our ability to express our religious beliefs, right? Are we allowed to share our sincerely held religious beliefs online in a public forum, as you mentioned? And sometimes it's clear that the governments do not support that, right? There is not strong free speech protection. And, of course, a part of religious freedom, I always define religious freedom as the ability to choose, hold, and live out your faith.
And evangelize.
And
evangelize. You got to add that in there, too, yes.
Yeah, part of living out your faith is being able to share your faith and being able to speak about your beliefs.
But apparently, in some places, you can't even do that on Facebook. What I saw when I looked at this, and like I say, I was looking mainly at the English-speaking countries, the ones that you just mentioned, Canada, UK, and the United States, is that most of this centered around a couple of topics: gender identity, sexuality, and traditional marriage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So these are many of the sticking points that we see. And these are all issues that kind of stem from the sexual revolution. And so when we have governments, which are supposed to be neutral, right? They're supposed to protect our rights. And in all of these countries across Europe, they have religious freedom protections in the law. So these governments are supposed to be upholding religious freedom. But what we see is that these governments care much more about protecting and promoting, especially abortion, LGBT lifestyles, transgenderism. And so when Christians make any type of expression, when they express doctrine that might disagree with these issues or might challenge the societal secular narrative on these issues, we find that Christians can be punished. And that includes being fired from their state jobs, being fired from the public school system for having a belief like this. So these are many of the sticking points we see.
Yeah, and a lot of these cases involved education and children and teachers who were not agreeing with policy and things like that. And there were dozens of them in there where people have lost their jobs because as a teacher they wouldn't comply with a policy that tried to keep parents in the dark about their children's sexuality.
Absolutely. And I think that it shows something almost spiritual that's happening in our countries where the fight really is over the children, right? Over what are we instilling in the next generation, what type of values, what type of worldview and belief system. And we have seen incidents where, just like you mentioned, teachers have been fired simply because they don't want to abide by a new transgender policy in a school district that says, you know what, if a child is transitioning their gender, you cannot tell the parents, right? It's not your responsibility to tell the parents. So they're actually asking these teachers to lie. And if you're a Christian, that's a huge thing, being asked to lie, and then being asked to lie and facilitate this false belief in an impressionable child that they could change their sex or change their gender, right? Christians should not be made to participate in anything like this, and we shouldn't have to lose our jobs in order to do so, right? Our public school system, we need good teachers. We need more teachers, not less. So we really should not be firing good teachers simply because they want to live according to their Christian conviction.
Right. Well, we know that the policy and the aim of the people that are behind this is to indoctrinate the children. If you can indoctrinate the children, you've got another generation of fellow travelers, I guess, or useful idiots as they may be, and probably most of them are at this point. But that kind of perpetuates the problem.
And there's a lot of consequences for these religious freedom violations. For example, in the United States, we saw where couples have been denied foster care licenses because of their Christian beliefs about sexuality and gender, specifically in some of these blue states like Oregon. If you are a couple that wants to foster a child and you will not affirm transgenderism, you might not be able to foster a kid. And that's hurting not only Christians, not only Christian couples who just want to open up their home and love and serve a child in need, but it's also hurting these kids who are not going to be placed in this loving home and might not be exposed to Christians, right? The way that some of these laws are treating Christians, they're treating us like we're dangerous because we aren't embracing this false ideology of transgenderism, and it's really harmful.
Just as a little commercial here for us, as I was reading through this, especially in the U.S. section, I noticed there were a lot of cases or a lot of things that you brought up where we've had those people on the program before. We've had usually the attorneys on the program discussing these cases. So a lot of our listeners out there should be familiar with some of these, especially the case that you just mentioned where you can't now foster. I think it's either in Oregon or Washington. It's somewhere out there on the left coast. But where you can't be approved as a foster parent. And I remember we had the case in Philadelphia where Catholic Charities wasn't able to work with foster placements and things like that because of their beliefs on where to place children and in a two-parent home and things like that. So a lot of these things for people who are listening to us regularly, it shouldn't be a big surprise. But I think one of the big surprises is what's going on in England and Canada, especially England. It doesn't seem that a country like England would have some of these problems too, but they do. They do. The other area that I thought was kind of interesting was general religious animus. And I've had, there was a lot of stuff that we already knew about pretty much where different governments, especially smaller local unit governments, were using COVID as a prop to be able to begin some crackdown on church practices, including when the pastors had these drive-in worship services where since people couldn't get out and go anywhere in the car, they stayed in their car and the pastors used a little low-watt FM program to talk to them so people could hear through their car radio, and state troopers would show up and start taking down license numbers.
Yeah, I think COVID brought a lot of that to the surface, where maybe some of these local political leaders or civic leaders already had that type of animus towards Christianity or towards religion. They don't get it. They don't understand it. They certainly don't respect it. And so COVID really was an opportunity to kind of showcase that, right, where they did not see the point in keeping churches open. They did not treat churches as essential.
Strip clubs were.
Yeah, I know. It really shows the priorities.
That's right.
And it's really sad.
Yeah. And then there were other things that under the general religious animus things where we were having, in one case there was that you noted in there was a facility, I don't know if it was a school or something, that said they could not hire chaplains from any denomination that did not ordain women.
Yeah, and it's dangerous because it's the government trying to influence religious practice, right? They'll say, oh, sure, we're happy to work with faith-based organizations as long as these faith-based organizations are happy to hire homosexuals or hire people that openly don't even agree with their faith. Right. That's a huge challenge.
Right. And then there was the thing in there about a journalist, I think it was a student journalist at a university, that was fired from the student newspaper because of her Catholic beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we see in some of these local towns, churches or religious organizations being targeted for no reason or being targeted for unfair scrutiny by the local government. In one case, a church was just serving homeless people and giving free meals to the homeless, and they were told that they couldn't do it, but they were offering a service, right? They were doing what they felt that was their responsibility. They were convicted to serve their community in this way, and they were just being faced with fines for doing so. They were just being threatened by the local government. So in some cases, it's almost inexplicable the way that these local governments are treating churches or are targeting them unfairly. But I think it does show a bit of like an underlying animosity towards the Christian faith.
Yeah, and it was interesting as I'm looking at this. I think it was Catholic Vote just came out with a new report that in the past 4 years there have been at least 400 different acts of violence against Catholic churches in the country. That kind of, I think, explains a little bit of this, too.
That's another huge issue. So this report, Free to Believe, that we've been talking about, it's focusing on the government, but you've just hit on another huge issue where it's not just the government that is acting out in this way against Christians. It's also society at large, and we see that by a rise in attacks on churches. When we're seeing these vandalisms and arsons, I don't think we would have seen it at this level several decades ago in our country. And to me, that just shows that there's just a collapse in respect and reverence for religion broadly, but specifically for Christianity. And in some cases, there does seem to be just this underlying anger that I don't even know that these people attacking churches know they're operating under that kind of anger. But clearly, if you're passing a church and you decide to destroy a statue of Mary outside a church or feel compelled to throw a brick inside a stained glass window, like it shows something wrong underneath the surface.
Right. And the fact that we're just taking this anymore as a normal course of things says something about those that will sit back in silence, too.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. The fact that the media isn't talking about this, that it's not getting a lot of attention. Great people like you are covering this, obviously, but widely, I don't think it's known what's happening, these religious freedom violations, these attacks on churches. I mean, if these were attacks on some other type of institution, if they were attacks on, for example, abortion facilities, we would hear nothing except about this. The fact that we're not hearing about it really shows what the media cares about and even what our political class cares about. The fact that Biden isn't speaking up and saying, you know what, these attacks on churches are wrong and we need to condemn them, it shows a real problem.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, why it's important for people like you to turn out these reports and appear in programs like this so that we can get the word out as to what's going on. One other thing that I noticed that was kind of an odd thing to me was that there was a doctor, I think this was in England, that was fired for praying with a patient. Now, I do a lot of hospital ministry. I go once a week to the hospitals and see our parishioners and all that are in the hospitals or nursing homes or whatever, take them communion and pray with them. And I know from that ministry that prayer in the health ministry is very, very important, and why a doctor would be disciplined for that, I don't understand.
I know there's something about it that's so inhuman, right? When you're a patient at a hospital, and I don't know what this patient was dealing with. Obviously, you're even if you're not Christian or not religious, you're more open to prayer because it really puts things in perspective and just how out of control many of these things that happen to us in life are. You're more open to that. So a doctor should not be punished for praying. I'm sure it was not against this patient's will. But when you have this state-run government healthcare system, it enables the government to monitor and squeeze and enforce rules that are wrong. Yeah. And it's a serious violation of religious freedom when you're not allowing someone to pray.
Yeah, and like I say, this is reading through these incidents that you have listed in this report is eye-opening, and it should scare anybody who has an opportunity to look at it, who does read it. And you can find the report, by the way, at your website. It's frc.org.
Absolutely.
And it's go ahead.
or to go straight to the report, you can go to frc.org/free-to-believe.
Free to Believe is the name of the report, so that's a good way to remember it. Arielle, we want to thank you. I know you have another appointment here real quick, and we don't want to take you away from that because there's a whole other group of people, I think, that need your words. So we appreciate your time, and we will talk to you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was good to be with you.
Thank you. Arielle del Turco from the Family Research Council. And again, you can find that report at frc.org. And we will be right back after these messages. You are listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we're back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. And we have with us right now, we have Jeremy Dies, who is Senior Counsel for First Liberty. Jeremy, how are you this morning?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for having me.
Very good. Very good. We're glad you're doing well. And you have an interesting victory, I guess, right now that we want to talk about. It started out with a little bit of a problem, and this is the church in, I guess it's in Fort Worth, Texas, that wanted to buy some advertising time on Hulu, and they were denied. So you want to pick it up from there and give us the background of this?
Yeah, it's a little confusing in that the church's name is a lot like the product, too. They were trying to advertise on Hulu. The church's name is Hulin Street Church. And so the church at Hulin Street is a little bit different than some other churches that have just Sunday morning services. They realized there was a need for Thursday night services as well. And so they started another service for Thursday evenings. And they went to advertise on Hulu with this 22-second ad that basically had the who, what, where, when about the church service. It was rejected initially, and so they thought something maybe technical went wrong, and so they resubmitted the ad. And when they resubmitted the ad, it was rejected a second time. And that time they asked for an explanation, and customer service from Hulu wrote back and said that the ad constituted religious indoctrination in violation of their policies. Well, look, number one, no one in the Western Hemisphere would have thought that an advertisement for a church service would constitute religious indoctrination. But lay that aside for a minute. Those words don't even appear in the ad guideline policies for Hulu's advertising. And so it was a bit weird that would be rejected for religious indoctrination, showing, I think, again, what we've seen too many times across the country in the recent years, that big tech companies sort of make up the rules as they go, and far too often religious speech gets suppressed and censored. And we think that's what happened here.
Yeah, usually it's an ex post facto rule that they've come up with late.
Yeah, no, that's how it feels, right? That you have certain guidelines that are out there, but then when they actually reject it, somebody else has either misinterpreted those guidelines, or they've just made it up entirely. I don't know which one happened here, but regardless, this ad was rejected, and we asked Hulu and Hulu's company, or the parent company, Disney, to reinstate that advertisement.
All right. What was the point that you made in your letter? Gene and I, a couple of weeks ago, were talking about these letters that attorneys send out before litigation to see if a matter can be settled. And this time, you able to settle this with a letter. So what did the letter contain that made Hulu stop and think, maybe we better not screw around with this anymore?
Yeah, I don't know if it was just my signature at the end of that.
That was probably it. Yeah, they saw it was you.
Right.
Will you sign all my letters, please?
Yeah, no, right. Or, First Liberty has a very good track record of winning, of course, and perhaps they knew that as well. But at the end of the day, I think they realized, wait a minute, we've really stepped in it here. Look, all we asked for in the letter was that Hulu actually have standards, that they have policies. And if they have those policies, they live by them. That means that they got to then apply them fairly. And in this situation, look, if we're going to get into indoctrination, are we really going to say that a church service advertisement is religious indoctrination when Hulu advertises for online gambling, they advertise for alcohol sales, and all these other things? Are we saying that those are not indoctrination of some sort? Again, I think that's just silly to think that one would be rejected and the others would be accepted. So they're not applying them fairly. And, here's the other thing. I'm aware of the context in which we're having this conversation, which is the day we sent that letter happened to be the day that the Supreme Court of the United States was hearing arguments concerning two laws, one in Florida, one in Texas, that were the state's attempts to simply try to get social media and big tech companies to have announce articulated standards and then applying them fairly. I think that's what all Americans want, is just to know what they have to abide by and that they're going to be treated fairly when those guidelines are put in place. Here, there were no guidelines, and certainly they weren't applied fairly.
Right. And we were mentioning the Texas and Florida case earlier in the program, and to me it just seems like a straightforward consumer protections that we would have in just any kind of product.
Yeah. Well, how do you know if you're abiding by the rules if they haven't actually announced them?
Right.
And actually, what Hulu's advertising guidelines say are that they will review religious advertisements on a, quote, case-by-case basis. Well, that's the exact type of ambiguity that allows them to sort of have their cake and eat it too, or at least they think so, right? They're saying, no, we're going to allow religious ads, but on this case-by-case basis. Well, look, that puts a lot of unbridled, unfettered discretion in the hands of some reviewer of ads wherever that person might be sitting. And so if they are having a good day, they might approve your ad. But if they're having a bad day or they simply just don't like you, they can simply reject the ad and say they've abided by their policy. Now, look, Hulu, Disney, they need to articulate their standards. Here's the thing. If they want to reject religious ads, if they don't want any religious ads on their platform, they have every right to do that as a private company, but at least have the courage to say so and abide by that policy. If they think the business decision benefits them to reject religious advertisements, well, stand behind that business decision and see if the economy holds up with that. I don't know that it would, but, at least have the courage of your convictions to tell everybody we don't want those religious ads here and we're not going to accept them. Having this sort of amorphous case-by-case basis thing just results in way too many problems for them.
Yeah. When you say that this was settled just as the Supreme Court was hearing a case, I thought it was because we had booked you the day before, and and they were worried about bad publicity here. But let's take a broader look at this. We have a victory here, which was articulated well, I think, in your letter. Why? But this isn't an isolated case. This seems to be happening all over with religious things, whether it's placing an ad someplace or renting space somewhere or something like that, where somehow there's always a reason why the Christian facility or faculty is denied. And I know you see a lot of that.
Look, and it's not just me who sees it. Everybody sees it. Everybody knows the, quote, elephant in the room is that if you have a certain disposition when it comes to conservative speech, especially if it's religious, it seems, social media people are somehow on that, like white on rice. I mean, they just jump on it right away. And I'm not quite sure why. Look, Franklin Graham, John Piper, Seth Dillon, the Babylon Bee, these are all examples of people who have been suppressed or had their speech suppressed online. They've had their posts taken down because they're religious. Sometimes that's as a result of campaigns by some activists trying to just knock their speech off the platform. In the case of the Babylon Bee, it took a billionaire ponying up $44 billion to get them to get back onto social media because they refused to bend the knee to the woke ideology that was suppressing their speech online. And that's just, it shouldn't take a billionaire. It shouldn't even take a letter from a lawyer to Disney saying reinstate a church's advertisement for their church services for people to be able to speak. We've got a great standard that's worked for 200 years plus in this country. It's called the First Amendment. And when we prefer more speech rather than less speech, freedom as a whole flourishes and all of us benefit for it. That's the standard that Hulu and other companies ought to be adopting.
This, again, this bleeds over into other areas besides speech. Well, I suppose it all boils down to speech, but besides advertising and social media. I mean, you see this, we have certain posts that get people that are losing their jobs over posts that they make on Facebook or something like that, or places where they churches can't rent a facility or the local city prevents them from getting rezoned or reclassified so that they could build on their property. We see a lot of this, and it seems to me that a lot of this goes back to religious animus.
Well, is it any wonder that all those things that you just listed off are happening? If you can't actually speak your mind and say what you believe, if big tech and social media companies are going to say that religious speech is a pariah amongst our society, well, are you surprised that society treats you like a pariah? Like you're something that should be hidden from view and shouldn't be mentioned in polite conversation? This is precisely why the First Amendment was put in place in the first place for all of society, for us to live up to as that ideal. Now, government, of course, can't suppress your speech without committing a civil rights violation, but that's the ideal that they want for private institutions as well, to be able to welcome more speech rather than less speech, to make sure that we are all treated with the fairness and respect that we deserve. And when you have social media companies just sort of knee-jerk reacting to the woke mob and censoring speech that they find doesn't match their ideals, well, then they just put pitchforks and torches in the hands of that mob, and they go after those religious speakers with even more gusto. That's the kind of thing that has to end.
I was thinking as you were mentioning the speech and the I guess the riots or the crowds that try and control them. There was just a case, I guess it was in at the University of California at Berkeley, where they shut down a Jewish, I guess, lawyer's speech. He was supposed to be speaking at an auditorium there, and they shut that down. One of the problems that I see, and I'm sure you see it too, and you probably have more experience with it than I do, is that a lot of the institutions, like in this case the school, allows this to happen because they don't stand up for the speaker.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, again, here we've gotten so far afield from what the founders wanted for us, which was a country that welcomed a robust debate. Why? Well, so that somehow the best argument would survive challenged by other speech. And in that, it would reveal what is, let's call it capital T truth, the thing that we ought to live by. And that's what they wanted. But instead, what we've had happen in recent years, and this is only an invention in the last decade or maybe even less than that, instead we've had state officials, university officials especially, and others just simply committed to upturning that idea, that they have to somehow promote minority voices as the gospel truth without any challenge to them. And if anybody challenges those assertions of those voices, well, then those challenges have to be suppressed and censored and removed, because that might rattle the safe space in which they're in, or whatever it might be. Look, more speech, free speech, is a dangerous concept. We all recognize that. But it's the best concept that we could possibly have in light of all the other alternatives. Because if we've got someone that's going to pronounce for us what we can think or what we can say, well, then we're no longer free.
I remember a time when the Ku Klux Klansmen were marching, and there was riot police protecting them so that they could have their rally. And now we got to the point where a Jewish lawyer wants to talk about Jews, and he shouted down, and they allow that to happen.
That's just a crying shame. Look, we saw that right after the Dobbs decision came out as well.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, people are going to have disagreements over things, but when you start to protect people who are engaging in violence as a result of that disagreement, well, that's wrong. Look, that's how the rest of human history has resolved our differences. They've resorted to violence. America was supposed to be different because we were going to resort to civil discourse and the rule of law to resolve our disagreements. If we don't have government officials willing to uphold that rule of law, then what has separated us from the rest of human history and human experience? Nothing at all.
Yeah, that's true. Now, First Liberty handles a lot of these things, and people can find out a little bit more about what is going on at First Liberty by going to the website. It's firstliberty.org, if I remember correctly.
That's right. Yeah, they can read about this letter and all the other cases we're handling to defend religious liberty for all Americans at firstliberty.org.
Very good. And it's also a place where people, if they have some spare change and want to donate it to a good cause, can send it along to help you finance your work.
Yeah, that's the good news about the work that we do, is that our clients never get a bill from us because of good people like you and others who invest in this organization to make sure that if the government's going to violate your civil rights, you don't pay an attorney to get them back. Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time and everything that First Liberty does, and we'll have you back again when you have another Hulu incident. That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. All right. Thank you very much. Jeremy Dice, Senior Counsel for First Liberty. And we will be right back after these messages. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. All right, we are back. You're still listening to Faith on Trial on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network. Interesting and kind of complimentary guest today, Gina.
Right.
Talking about shutting down Christian conduct and Christian speech.
Exactly. And this is a perfect case of it, like having the Hulu case exemplify exactly what Arielle was describing in Family Research Council's report. But interestingly, the little bit of the report I was able to read, I noticed that they were building on a report on other reports that I know theirs started in 2020, ended in 2022, so about a 2.5-year scope. But there were many cases prior to that. The Pew Research Center, very well-respected organization for their work in research, showed much of this starting before 2019 even. Right.
I think the ideas were there in the minds of some people, and I think COVID exacerbated that. It gave them an opportunity to get in and do things and require things that they weren't able to do ahead of that, like keeping churches closed, keeping the numbers that could attend church services down with no rhyme or reason. Like we pointed out before, and we've pointed it out many times, when strip clubs were allowed to be open, but churches were closed, there was something behind that.
Exactly. Of course. Perfect example.
Yeah. And even hardware stores were, in some areas, were allowed to be open while the churches had to be closed. And churches that were open weren't allowed to have any singing in there. I mean, there were odd restrictions on churches. And a lot of this came right from COVID, and I think COVID was the excuse for people to do things that they might not have otherwise been able to do. But this was a health emergency. And if you remember now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked to somebody, probably I think it was from the Family Research Council, about this new health care treaty that is being talked about, or this agreement among the nations where certain health care decisions like handling pandemics take precedence over their own laws and their own freedoms in the individual countries. So you can see this is all coming back. It's going around in a circle. And if we're not careful, that's going to come back and bite us. But we see that.
And you talk about being careful. I think my point that this was occurring well before the COVID, and we all think that COVID probably exacerbated it. But more importantly, I think it opened the eyes to the divisiveness of religious animus in our schools, especially.
Oh yes,
and that our students and our kids were being indoctrinated in a non-religion, really, in secular behaviors. And 2020 really the COVID kind of opened up our eyes to it. And so the hope in all of this, listening to Arielle made me wonder, where is the hope? Where does this end? Where does this trend continue to or begin to change? And I do think that the fact that our eyes were opened in 2020 to this effect is helping with the change. It may feel more visceral right now, but there are a lot more schools and homeschools and charter schools and private schools, religious schools that are helping our children to be educated without the influence of the secular, for lack of a better word, religion.
And our hope right now in large measures with people like Arielle and Jeremy, who we had on, who are out there fighting the fight. We've talked before about letters that attorneys write. Here's a good example of something that an attorney did that got reaction right away.
Yeah, and I'm surprised because, like he pointed out, Hulu is a Disney company, plenty of money. They could have taken it to court so many times on the show. How many times am I like, they're right. Why are we going to court? The letters laid out the law perfectly, explained the whole argument. Well, they mostly go to court because they have the money to do it, whether it's a government entity or a corporate entity.
And I still think
I'm surprised.
I still think they caved because we had booked Jeremy.
You want to take credit for that, Deacon Mike?
I want to take credit for that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but like I read these letters and I think it makes total sense. And why would you contest it in a court of law? But I think it's to affect public opinion and to strain the financial resources and time of the defendant. And and I think it's important that we keep people like First Liberty and the others that we've had on many times, ADF and others, we keep them in our prayers, because even if we can't always contribute to them, we can at least pray for them, that they have guidance from above. Because, these are the people out there in the front line that are working to protect our religious liberty. And that's extremely important. That's the first liberty. First liberty is religious liberty. Exactly.
Okay. All right. I think we are pretty much out of time here, and the time, I guess, for our Defender's Prayer. I got an email from somebody in Wisconsin just recently. We had talked about the St. Michael's Prayer either here on the radio or in one of my columns, and he wrote to tell me that in his diocese, all the churches and every Mass, or pretty much every Mass, with a prayer to St. Michael. And it should be coming back.
Growing up, that's our parish did that. We stayed at the very end to pray the St. Michael prayer.
That's right. And we pray it to close every program.
There's a history there, too.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that
sometime. Yeah. Leo the 13th.
Leo, that's
right. Yeah, right. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Well, that's it for today, and I want to remind you that the next Man Up is Friday, March 8th at noon at St. Francis. We'll be back again with another program next week. In the meantime, have a blessed and peaceful week. Make sure you go to church and take your kids.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.